You're listening to the Reversing Climate Change podcast by the team at Nori, the carbon removal marketplace. This is a show about the innovators and entrepreneurs developing solutions to climate change.
Language of the body?
I was thinking of like a low rent, like Tony Robbins kind of deal that you would go to. It would be called Language of the Body. It'd be like a $5,000 for a day and a half, and you would learn about the language of the body.
I'm in.
you're in.
I'll fly into Minneapolis for it.
Yeah, it's gonna be
$5,000 is low for Tony these days, isn't it?
That's like Tony's toenail clippings.
Yeah, it's like, well, this is like second or third rate Tony Robbins. It's not
okay.
Yeah.
Someone just starting out who's trying to teach his new all-encompassing system for living. This might be the weirdest intro to the show ever. Will it
Johnny Bobbins?
I don't know. I'll have to figure it out. Thanks for listening to whatever that was. I'm Ross Kenyon. I'm one of the co-founders of Nori, which is a carbon removal marketplace. I'm the creative editor over there. Tito Jankowski, CEO of AirMiners, here, putting him on a weird spot where you caught the beginning of that conversation. Hi, Tito. Welcome back. Been several years.
Hi. Welcome to you too, Ross.
Thank you. No one ever welcomes me to my own show, and I sometimes feel sad about that. Thank you for doing that. And then making her debut, Adina Mangubat, accelerator director at AirMiners. Hey, Adina.
Hi.
We've not had you on the show yet. And then also Jason Grillo in absentia. Sorry, Jason couldn't make it today, but we're thinking of you, Jason.
He's running an event right now, so he's got a good excuse.
He's listened to, I think, more of it than the show than many people. I feel like he has earned the right to come on here at some point.
Next time. Jason,
we'll just have you on. Just consider this an open invitation. AirMiners, doing cool things. We've talked about AirMiners so many times on the show. We're huge fans. The resources that you've made has shown incredible leadership over the years. We use them to onboard people like Boot Up, the Slack community. The number of people that I've met through there that I still talk to on a regular basis, it's super high. But someone listening might not even know what AirMiners is. So why don't we start at the basics here? What is AirMiners?
I think it maybe makes sense to start with kind of like what we're about, like why we're doing this. So for us, it's really about challenging the status quo and thinking differently when it comes to climate change. So we're really interested in empowering the people that are taking risks to accelerate the reversal of climate change via carbon removal. And so what that looks like is we do a bunch of different things. We have a startup accelerator program. We have a huge Slack community of innovators. We have investor academy to educate investors. We have buyer demo days. We have a bunch of different things. And we also happen to have a fund as well. So it's an organization that's really designed to aid in removing 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere cumulatively by 2030. So that's what we're up to.
I love that. Tito told me that was a somewhat new mission change, or you maybe put a fine point on it recently, that was the goal.
Yeah, we really decided that we wanted to be specific because before we were saying we want 1,000 shots on goal on carbon removal. And we were like, well, it's not just any shots. We want shots that actually make goal. So let's be specific about that.
How important is that? Does it actually have you made decisions differently after changing that, being specific in that way?
I mean, I think that we're definitely changing how we're thinking about scale. That's for darn sure. Like, as we think about the number of companies that we need to be able to scale our programs for, and thinking about what those companies need and the investment that those companies need and the programming that we're offering to make that investment available, that's all new within the last year based on that change.
Tito, you're kept over in this fund development area. They don't let you out. You just have to talk to investors and raise money and get companies funded. Is that your job now? Is that what you're doing? You're a financial guy now?
Unlocking capital for the early stage companies getting started is a critical piece of that, getting to 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide by 2030, for sure. That's what I'm digging in. We'll talk about later, but in terms of, how do we unlock that capital from investors of all sorts?
I don't want to make fun of you too much, Tito, but this is seriously the most reserved I've ever seen you. Where is the screaming Tito, the golden flaming hawk Tito that I've come to expect? What is... Let live, Tito. Do we got to start swearing to let you out of your cage?
That's right. Let's go remove a gigaton of carbon.
I'm sorry, I'm just making him blush now. Adina, do you agree with me though that we could turn the Tito up a little bit?
I mean, I think so. It's a complicated thing, right, with investors, because there's like a whole world of like what investors expect and like looking good and avoiding looking bad and expecting like a certain level of professionalism and all of that stuff. And so it's a question of like, how do you walk that fine line between giving investors confidence and also just being who we are, which is definitely got a certain wacky component to the whole thing. So, yeah.
I have a thesis for that. I think it's almost like the losses feel so much worse than the gains feel good. I feel like a lot, like the bigger the company is.
Oh shit! Are you Warren Buffett? I thought he's.
Does he say that? This is not like a me original here. This is a common sentiment, but I feel like the bigger a company or an organization is, the more they're worried. Like we might get like a nice press release and a couple pickups, but if it goes badly, the risk is much greater than the return. I think there is kind of a conservatism that inspires. I don't even know if that's true. I think you're way more versed, and I think you have a couple exits and you went through Y Combinator and you're a much fancier startup person, but I don't know if you agree with this as a business culture thing. Is that even true?
I mean, I think that people definitely over time are trying to minimize what they have to lose, right? The more successful you are, the more you have to lose. So I think that there's definitely a culture to that, but it's a choice. It might be an unconscious choice, but it's a choice that people make, and you don't have to run companies that way. And there definitely are companies out there like that, like that have gotten quite big that don't adhere to that. I mean, gosh, I remember meeting Tony Hsieh, who's the CEO of Zappos, and he built the wackiest, craziest culture I've ever seen. We were invited to his company's, I think it was like quarterly board meeting, and it was held in this gigantic auditorium, and there was like a game show situation and like, I don't know. So it doesn't have to be buttoned up, but I think that there is definitely that narrative that the more together we are, quote unquote, the more serious we have to be, or something like that.
I've liked working in AirMiners and carbon removal, especially with you, Tito, primarily because there is, if I have to cut this, it's okay, Tito, but there is a sort of goofiness and there's a humor. I always find it to be like kind of it's a very smart community. The collective IQ in there is pretty overpowering at times, but also there's a lot of laughs and a lot of like good fellow feeling. And I don't feel like that takes away from the seriousness of what we're doing. I think if you're too serious, it's like not really that fun of a place to work. It's burnout. It's bad.
I think it's also necessary to keep the levity of like, if you let yourself get too bogged down in the seriousness of what we're just making sure that the world doesn't go over 2 degrees Celsius and like that all of these island nations get flooded and like crops fail. And, we're just casually doing that. Like if we go there all the time and take it too seriously, I think that it's kind of crushing in a way. So I think the humor brings something to it.
Yeah, the humor is key. I've always said that the memes channel is one of the most powerful channels in AirMiners because it's how we express what's meaningful to us about carbon removal through images, through talking about it. And it steels us to then be able to face that serious bit and not to be numb to it, not to hide in charts and numbers and, that this needs to happen. It's, again, I was thinking about this. It's go time in 2023 for carbon removal. It's time to take the culture that we've built and scale it to pull up 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the air and beyond.
Speaking of, there's a new cohort of Launchpad participants. The app for that is closing soon. And at least part of the impetus for this show is what you're trying to gather the stragglers, right? I think last chance, get into this cohort. Is my read right?
Yeah, definitely. We have, so we do quarterly Launchpad offerings. Launchpad is our accelerator, and our deadline for application for this coming one is February 10th. So be there. We always love seeing the newest and coolest ideas. And so we're really fortunate that we get to see that. But we also want to get the word out because there's just so many people participating in this industry that weren't participating before. And so the more of those folks we can reach and the more of them we can empower, the better.
No, absolutely. I can't even keep track. We've talked about this on the show a million times. It's a totally new place, which is thrilling. Which stage companies are you considering for Launchpad? Is this ideation? Is this something that's written on the back of a napkin? Is it they have customers? Do they have a product? Where are they when they go into Launchpad?
Yeah, between the two kind of extremes that you offered. So usually they have something done from a technical perspective, like lab prototypes, some early results. Might have a customer, might not. More often than not, they probably don't. And that's one of the things that we talk about is like, how do you sell a carbon credit? There's an event coming up about that too. So for your listeners out there that are entrepreneurs that are asking that question, they can check that out. But yeah, that's a big, big component of it is how do you sell carbon credits? How does this market even work? Because it's kind of a weird, wild, wild west situation and is constantly evolving. I mean, gosh, what it was last year and what it is this year is just completely different January to January.
Is that the primary means of monetization that you're seeing for these startups? Do you think they should be looking at carbon credits, or are there other alternatives that should be on the table?
That's the majority of what we see, but it's not the only thing that we see. I mean, we definitely see combo plays, like where they're selling a product and removing carbon at the same time. So they're selling super duper carbon negative protein that can be used in the production of, faux hamburgers. Then that protein was pulled from seaweed, and then they take the remnants of said seaweed and then pyrolyze it, and then it's carbon negative, and they can sell carbon credits for that. So you can definitely get combo situations like that, where they have a product that they're selling and they also are selling carbon removal credits.
Are they all pointing towards extremely long duration carbon removal, and they're looking forward to qualifying for net zero? Are there many projects that are more like carbon storage? The terminology on all this stuff can use a fine tuning, I think. But
yeah, for sure.
Are you something like Frontier where you're saying, well, don't come to us unless maybe there's 1,000 years at some point? No. We definitely support carbon removal companies along the spectrum of permanence. So everything from the soil crew all the way to the 1,000-year mineralization, crew. And part of that is that I think that our thesis is we need it all. Soil carbon or even biochar may not be like ridiculously permanent, but it pushes the time horizon out with regards to the amount of carbon we need to remove from the atmosphere. And if you just look at how much carbon has been pulled so far and what we need to get to, I mean, the gap is vast. So even if we can delay needing to close the gap by 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, that helps. So we think that all methods are valid, necessary in order to make it so we don't overheat the planet. Everybody agrees that it's at least 100 years. Could be longer. And the scientific community is still out on that. So I'm not saying it couldn't be longer. I'm just saying that the general consensus is 100 years, not longer currently. Well, that's only because there's a strong anti-biochar conspiracy happening at the highest levels of academia.
At the highest levels of academia.
And if you knew the truth, Dina, you would not be talking like this in a public forum.
Wow.
Can I have your home address so I can come over and talk about it sometime?
I'm in Seattle with you, so there we go.
Yeah. I observed something true and then I amplified it and made myself available for extra criticism. So fun. Where do we go from here? Steer me back on track. Tell me about a cool company I don't know about. Please, Adina, help me.
There's lots of cool companies. I mean, I don't know. We see companies that are kind of acting across the board. So we've got a bunch of DAC companies, lots of modular DAC, everything from pH swing stuff all the way to being able to powderize sorbents and then float them through like a fluidized bed reactor to make the reaction go really, really fast. Like there's just a bunch of really interesting stuff happening on the DAC side of the house. Lots of ocean. I mean, we're big fans of the ocean stuff. And we know that the science is still out on with regards to if you sink it, does it really stay down there? And does it mess anything up if you do that? Like, I got it. But it also has huge potential in terms of its removal. So we're seeing a lot of robotics with regards to seaweed cultivation, seaweed collection, seaweed sinking. I think that's one of the reasons why I really love this work is that it is not boring for sure.
No, it's not.
It is not boring. You get to see all sorts of different things and to see the innovation that people have in solving this problem is incredible.
When you're working with these potential buyers and doing things like having a demo day where buyers are going to come in and look at these companies, are they really interested in the high quality MRV and tracking so that they can claim negative emission, or are they more looking to brag about supporting early stage tech and are less concerned with the carbon accounting business? Which one of those is doing most of the movement?
I would say you see both for sure. Oh. It kind of just depends on what people's goals are, right? So I would say within the buyer community, you kind of have two-ish ends of the spectrum. One end is, look, I've got emissions. I need to zero that situation out. I need highly credible stuff in order to do that. And I need it to scale. So I'm going to buy the highest quality, scalable removal credits I can possibly get my hands on, full stop. And then there are people that are on the other end of the spectrum that are like, that's great. But if we do not have supply, then this entire conversation is moot. So I got that there is a bunch of things that we need to do to get to really high quality MRV and all of that stuff. But if we don't fund the early stage, we're not totally sure yet, we've got some science that we still got to work out, stage companies, then we're never going to get there. And so we definitely see people on that end of the spectrum. And so it just depends.
I agree with the seriousness of this for having assets that qualify as truly negative, especially if you're trying to cancel out fossil fuel emissions. But I also love the idea of just supporting companies where they don't know. They say, hey, this is a cool idea. We want money to test it. We need to get this going. Don't count it on your carbon balance sheet because that's inappropriate to do so. But this is something that will certainly help scale that. I feel like this whole conversation has been we've been made extremely path dependent upon carbon accounting. And the only way people can think about this for the most part is I emitted X tons. I must remove or deal with X tons. And I feel like it's a failure of creativity and imagination here to think otherwise. I'm seeing signs of that changing. It sounds like maybe you are too, but it bums me out sometimes as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that the super early Vanguard folks have been there for a while. We're going to just try some stuff, like act now, perfect later. But I think that you also have to get really creative about how you fund these companies. It is complicated to fund really early stage companies in this space because there's a lot of things that investors don't know. Like, what are the exit prospects for these companies? Like, are these going to go IPO? Like, is there even a market for that in the future? Are they going to be profitable? Is somebody going to acquire this situation? There's a lot of questions. And so solving for how do you get money into these companies early is something that we've done a lot of thinking about, and Tito can speak to in great detail.
I'd love to hear from both of you. I'd love to hear more about how that works because so much of the carbon removal discussion has been on just does the tech work? And a lot of it takes place at the level of hardware and less at the level of finance. There's some exceptions here, but yeah, how should these companies be structured? Are they headed towards acquisitions, or are they trying to be the next major corporation that breaks through and becomes a unicorn that's standalone, who's going to become the Kleenex or Google of carbon removal? Like which of these models should companies even be pointing toward?
I mean, Tito, you want to take a stab at that?
It's enormous. You can go any direction you want with it, Tito.
Seriously.
Lots of stabbing. I think that's emerging in that sense. Is like which direction should these companies go? It's up for them to start to figure out. I mean, that's what we're seeing from buyers. That's what we're seeing from investors, from these sort of risk takers from the corporate side, from the investor side. What they're trying to figure out is, like Adina was saying, is there a market for this in the future? Is it profitable? What's it look like for these companies to persist? Is it going to be, 100,000 different suppliers and there's a NASDAQ style marketplace and exchange? Is it going to be that there's, kind of one that predominantly wins? Those questions right now, I think, are big blockers, specifically for investors when they're thinking about, when you're investing into ownership of a startup company through equity, is that something that's going to work out for you long term? Is that something that's going to make sense for you long term? And I think the answer from us is, the market's there. today. It's growing quickly, and it has to be there by 2050. And so really these questions around market, I think, are still spreading to the investor community. That's part of why we have the Investor Academy session in terms of helping investors that are new to carbon removal come, hear about how it works and how we think that it's going to come together. But ultimately, there are some gaps that still need to be filled at the very early stages of startup formation. Getting capital, whether it's seed stage capital or capital from buyers, is still something that's emerging.
I think that your question of should people be aiming for unicorn size? I mean, I think there's definitely room for a lot of unicorns. I mean, if you just do the math, by 2050, we've got to be removing 10 billion tons a year of carbon. And most people are aiming for about $100 a ton. So you can do the math on that and be like, oh, that's a $1 trillion market right there. So there's definitely room for a bunch of unicorns for sure. And what timeline is that going to happen on is the big question, right? And at the same time, we still need carbon removal companies to get started now, because if we don't, we are going to be hosed as a human society. So I think there's this question of well, how do you de-risk it enough to make it palatable given the uncertainty of how this whole thing is going to shake out in the future? And I think we have some interesting answers to that. And I'll let Tito kind of elucidate on that a little bit more. But I think that there's some creative financing options for sure.
You can just go ahead, Tito. I'd be happy to learn from you on this one.
Yeah, totally. So the traditional one is, we're bringing together these startup companies. We're helping them get to traction, getting their science communicated and figured out, getting the unit economics figured out. And so de-risking companies at that stage makes a lot of sense. And so, of course, we're starting a traditional fund there to invest back into these companies. That's, what's nice about that is it's a way to support and participate in these companies when they're, like you were saying, pre having all their MRV figured out, pre being out in the field. And that's one way. But we see that the number of investors who are doing that, there's still some of these hesitations about how big this market is going to be, what kind of risk they're taking on. And so one other thing that we've seen that we're exploring is, what about helping early stage companies sell their future carbon credits? So we know that the one thing that brings together these carbon removal companies is that they're all either directly selling carbon removal credits or they're assisting it in some way. So if you're a direct air capture company, or you're a storage company, or you're a biochar company, the product that brings them all together is that it's carbon removal credits. And maybe some of them have a physical product, or they're selling their biochar to farmers, or they're making food from the seaweed. But the thing that really unites all of these carbon removal companies is that they are removing carbon dioxide from the air. That's the fundamental thing. And so what we're seeing is the benefit for early stage companies is they know what product they're going to be developing. And so that's the same benefit for investors, is what product these companies are going to be making. They're going to be making carbon removal credits. What if there's something that we can build around that truth, or that we know that that's who the customers are. We know what the product is. There's not many kind of startup industries that have that kind of certainty in a way. If you're a software company, sure, you're going to be making software, but you don't really know who your customer is. You don't really know what the pricing is. Whereas with carbon removal, we know we're going to hit a 10 billion tons per year market. We're going to need to hit a 10 billion tons per year market. And it's going to be something around $100 a ton. If you look at the projections from Bloomberg, for example, they have it spiking to $250 around 2030, and then slowly descending to 2050. So yeah, there's some really curious stuff in there around what if we can help investors and startups have a stronger intersection around selling future carbon credits in kind of as a complement to buying equity in these companies.
See some deep thoughts happening over there, Ross.
What should I make for dinner tonight? Yeah, there's a podcast going on. No, there is a lot to think about there. There's so many different angles. You said something to me related to this the other day, Tito, which was the size of investments in carbon removal marketplaces was quite high in some regards relative to other investment opportunities. I'm not sure exactly on the metrics on that. Maybe one of you can explore that a little bit. But do you think people, including Nori, we're a marketplace, do you think we're too early? Do you think that marketplaces can be doing something to help in a less traditional kind of way? Because marketplaces are about throughput and volume, right? And given that there's not a lot of that, what should all the money that's going into marketplaces do? Or should marketplaces be using that money to do something differently? God, I'm trying to say this in such a cautious way. I don't want to spill the beans on what I'm thinking about it, but go ahead, react in that limited way.
I think anything you can do to unlock supply, that's where we've seen our whole focus is around, is how do we unlock more supply? Whoever wants to help solve that, marketplaces or anybody else, I think that's the key to getting to these billion-ton levels, at least in 2023. That's the bottleneck, is who's going to actually pull this stuff out of the sky, and how are they going to do it?
And how are they going to have funding to do it?
Yeah, and how do we funding to do it in the sense of like able to quit your job and like start prototyping a thing. By the time you've got your MRV figured out, like cool, yeah, you're much more. It's much more easily funded. But there's the gap at that really early stage where there's not enough buyer cash going around in terms of pre-purchases. They're able to pay sometimes even like 50% upfront or something. But most of them, the amount of pre-purchase cash that you get is low. Investor capital, again, pre-MRV, pre kind of starting to scale up. There's a really big gap there.
Yeah. So I don't know if marketplaces, like to your question, Ross, like can marketplaces play a role in that? I mean, I guess it depends on like how willing y'all are to take risk, right? And I think that has a lot to do with who your buyers are and who you're serving. And I don't know that it is a marketplace solvable issue to deal with that particular section of the, It's essentially the crossing the chasm gap, right? Yeah, you've got to sort that out. And so we see this opportunity to basically say, okay, investors, like, what if you were to invest in carbon removal future credits now that are deliverable by 2030? And we've got a pretty darn good idea of what those things are going to sell for. And so you basically get the arbitrage between them. And it's good for the startups because it's non-dilutive capital and it's a clear signal that there is demand for those credits. And it helps the supply situation and that it gets more suppliers online faster. So that's how we're thinking about it.
That's a fun idea. What do you think is coming next? Like right now, it's all about various ways of doing forward financing is mostly what I'm seeing. A lot of this is the CDR.FYI site. As much as I love it, freaks me out whenever I look at it too. The tons bought versus tons delivered. I'm like, oh my God, this is a long ways to go.
Even the tons bought has a long ways to go. Yeah.
And also that is still small. Yeah.
I think with the gap that's or the opportunity here is that like, in a sense, these early buyers are, these pre-purchase are in a sense trying to help with this crossing the chasm thing, but like they're not really trying to do that. Like they're trying to buy carbon, like, and you're trying to purchase carbon, but you also want to help these companies bridge this gap. And it's just that's where this this idea of like helping startups get early capital by pre-selling carbon futures at a discount. That's where it's like, okay, now you can actually invest comfortably. You're buying carbon credits, you're getting this discount. It starts to make things make a lot more sense. Look, there are buyers that really get the risk that they're taking on. I think Shopify is a great example of this, right? They're going in, they're like, these purchases, we've got our $5 million a year sustainability fund. This is meant to be catalytic capital. It's meant to get companies over the gap. But all buyers aren't that. And they shouldn't need to be that. Like they should be able to just buy carbon. And so we need to be able to set up this system so that buyers can buy carbon, investors can take risk and support early stage companies, and early stage companies can get the financing and credits and customers that they need to get off the ground, to get to MRV stage, to get to scaling up stage. And so bridging that gap is really, really key. Because in a sense, we're inviting all these people to start companies and being able to bridge the gap from, you've got an idea and a prototype to you're up and running, you have a team. That gap is really, really important for our ability to get to this billion tons by by 2030 and 10 billion tons removed every year by 2050.
Do either of you have any sense on which family of technologies will best achieve that goal of scale and cost? No, you don't even want to make
No, that's the whole, I mean, that's the whole gap right now, right? Is you're throwing diligence at a wall and trying to figure out, like, you're trying to pick winners when there's not even a baseball field yet, right? Like we haven't even invented baseball bats. Like we're just so early in this market that, like, you can say, look, we know this market needs to be big, and by 2050 it is going to be big. But the gap there is, well, how do you say that? How do you invest like that? How do you design your career around that?
If you also look at the scale of the problem, Ross, like, the scale of the problem is insane, right? Like, I don't think that you're going to just get it done with the direct air capture companies, or just get it done with the ocean companies, or just get it done with the biochar companies. Like, all of those have very real scalability potential, but the scalability in one sector is not sufficient to meet the 10 billion tons required to save the planet. Like, it's not going to happen otherwise. So that's part of the reason why we think it's really important to have a diverse portfolio of companies that are attempting to make this climb.
You said 3,000 people maybe working carbon removal, 4,000, Tito? At least on the supplier side?
Yeah, that's my estimate.
There's nothing.
On the supplier side, it's nothing.
You could probably whip together some crazy half-baked idea you just had listening to this show, bother Tito and Adina with it, and before you know it, you'll be in the Launchpad. Just kidding. It's more than that. I'm going to have to strike this too.
No, I mean, like, look, we have companies though that have come through like that. I mean, we have our boot up series, right? Which is like, you're brand new to CDR. And I did this program, by the way. It's how I ended up, like, in Tito's virtual office being like, hi, I want to do this. But, we have boot up, which is like, I'm brand new to CDR. I don't know what's going on. Like, tell me about all the things. Tell me about all the methods. What are all the problems? And we have teams that come out of that go on to form companies, and X number of quarters later apply to Launchpad and get in. So, like, yeah, it's a real thing, and it's an all hands on deck situation. And if you are inspired to try and take this particular, like, task on, like, let us know how we can empower you, because we need as many people as we can get in this boat. It is going to take a monumental human effort to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
You guys pretty excited about your work? Does it ever get you down? Or are you mostly pretty optimistic?
I think we're both just pretty optimistic as human beings. I don't know, Tito, what do you think?
I was like, there's this guy, Hans Rosling, who he framed himself as a possibilist. And so it's when you're grounded in, like, we've had 70 plus startup teams go through the AirMiners accelerator, right? So we're very grounded in, like, what's possible. And when you're grounded in what's possible and you look forward, people may think you're an optimist, but you're just really just speaking the truth of what you're seeing. And I think that's going to be obvious looking back, 2030, 2050. People will look back and, like, it's the risk takers that are going to be the ones to figure out how to make this happen. Like, this sort of idea of, like, oh, somebody's going to come up with some random idea. That is likely what is going to gigatonne-scale carbon removal, is those, whether you call them eureka moments, whether you call it somebody from the outside coming to the inside, this bottom-up approach, whether you call them entrepreneurs, whether you look at investors, whether you look at buyers, bottom-up approach is true. Like, if you look at the new carbon removal companies that have gotten started, these people are climate scientists. They're not, like, experts in carbon removal. There aren't any, for one. And it's people that do say, hey, they're looking at a direct air capture machine and say, hey, that I know the design of that motor really well. There's 10 different ways you could make that motor better, and I'm going to go do it. And you're like, well, I didn't even know that you had motors. Right? I mean, it's just bringing people into carbon removal, I think, that's how we're going to get to this billion tons by 2030. And that's why having an accelerator program is so key for that, is we're able to meet founders where they are, people with an idea, people with something that can become a solution, and without so much judgment around, like, oh, we think this will be gigaton or not. It needs to emerge. That's the thing, is you need support, you need resources, start figuring out whether the thing is going to work or not.
Yeah. And I think that there's also just, like, they always say, like, it's lonely at the top, right? It's like, okay, it's lonely at the top. And then you pick an industry that is of the size that this is, right? And then it's like, just continue to persevere by yourself, right? Like that's not going to work. So I think that a big part of what we do is we actually provide a space for people to authentically connect and talk about the tough stuff of being an entrepreneur, but not just the tough stuff of being an entrepreneur, it's like being an entrepreneur in carbon removal at this point in time. It is a unique set of challenges that does not exist for most entrepreneurs. If you're starting a software company or an app company or whatnot, it's just not the same. And I think that having a community of people where you're in the same boat together makes a huge difference for being able to not just share knowledge, but also share the frankly emotional and mental journey that this is. Because these are the crazy ones that are saying, I'm going to do this. And we love those folks. That's why we do what we do.
AirMiners has always struck me as a pretty friendly community, especially to admit uncertainty too. I never felt bad about asking a quote unquote bad question or stupid question. And I always like that culturally. And Nori's big on that too. Whenever we run meetings, we always try to make it so that I oftentimes try to throw out the worst idea possible at the start of a meeting, especially a brainstorming one, just so that there's a baseline where it's like, you can't have an idea worse than this one. But oftentimes like that idea, someone will be like, not this is not that good of an idea, but what about this? And you're like, you have a good laugh. You're like, well, wait a second. What about this? And then of course, all the best ideas have come out of that. Like this pitch is bad. And then a riff on that has made it amazing. I don't know if you've seen it at all, but I love culture like that.
We need to see more of that. It's totally like that. We need to see more of that. Anne Lamott has shitty first drafts is the concept. And you get the shitty first drafts out of the way. We would love to see more shitty first drafts. Like whatever it is you've got, whatever the concept is, whatever the idea is, you can judge the progress of an industry. And I think you can judge the progress of carbon removal by the number of shitty first drafts. And we need to see more shitty first drafts. We need to see a wider diversity of ideas and concepts that really seem like, is that really going to work? Whether it's something from the capture, storage, removal, marketplaces, MRV, or a new category. Dare to think of something that's going to actually get us to gigaton scale carbon dioxide removal with the goal of a gigaton by 2030. I mean, that's if you look at the charts, we've pre-sold something like 1 million carbon removal tons. That's 0.1% of a billion tons. Like we really do need radical risk takers to come along. And again, that's risk takers in terms of entrepreneurship, starting startups, making investments, making purchases. And that's how we're going to get there. It's really exciting. I mean, you asked about like, is it optimistic and possible? It's freaking cool. Like looking through meeting new teams, working on some solution you've never thought of or never heard of, working on a problem that you've never thought of or heard of. I mean, that's one of the benefits I think of this kind of second generation of carbon removal companies is you could potentially go interview everybody at Climeworks, ask them what problems they're seeing, and then go out and build a solution that you can partner with every direct air capture company to provide a solution for it, right? So you start getting these like, you can start solving industry scale problems. You can directly remove carbon yourself. Big opportunities there.
Adina, are you cool with the Launchpad being associated with so many shitty first drafts?
Definitely.
You like it?
Yeah. Because you know what? Like they come in shitty first drafts and like, gosh, the amount that you can accomplish in 6 weeks is amazing. It really is, from that pressure cooker, like everybody's in the same boat, driving toward a common goal. There really is something about community providing that foundation and that space for creating often it's like the miraculous, Today we were working on pitches, right? There's this one team that I'm working with, and like I remember their very, very first pitch like 2 weeks ago. And it was a pile, it was. And then they came back and I was like, yeah, this is good. Yeah, I think you're ready to like call up Shopify, like go do that. Right. So it really can be a quick turnaround. And I think that the community aspect, also just having talked to a lot of buyers, like I think that AirMiners is an odd place in that it's not like we're isolating into one silo. Like we only talk to the entrepreneurs. It's like, no, we talk to the entrepreneurs. We talk to the investors, we talk to the buyers, we talk to the marketplaces. We understand like what all of those folks are kind of looking at and what they're concerned for, et cetera. So we can help these teams tell their story in a way that's compelling, understandable, et cetera, to all of these different people that are going to be relevant for their success. And so I think that those things in combination, plus being able to provide a real platform for people to talk about what they're doing via the investor demo days or the buyer demo days, it's totally okay to have a shitty first draft. We will get you to the place where you can have successful conversations with the folks that are going to matter to you.
It's working. I mean, in that sense, like 70 plus teams have come through. $23 million has been raised. 3 of the teams won milestone awards from the X Prize, Carbon Rule Prize. 2 of them won student prize money. This is the approach that we need. We're proving it out. And again, of course, we're adding on a fund. Of course, we're looking at how to deploy capital to these companies. It's working, and we would love to see more people giving it a shot.
I love it. Links to all those things are in the show notes. If you've been thinking about a carbon removal idea, why not apply? Why not try to get involved in AirMiners? Boot Up is great. So many good resources here. Also, thanks to you both for maybe titling the show. I think I'm going to have to call it something with shitty first drafts. I don't know. I've never sweared in an episode title, but maybe I need to. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe it is an explicit content warning.
I think it finally got there. I feel like if I had to bleep out shitty 50 times in a row, it would be unlistenable. So I'm not cutting that segment. I'm not cutting it. So thanks you both for being here. Big fan of what you do. I think what you do is so important. I love AirMiners. It's my favorite place to hang out. I'm kind of more of a lurker now just because I feel overwhelmed by more quotidian duties, but I'm a big supporter, and thanks for what you do.
Thank you. Thanks, Ross, for having us on.
Ross.
Hey, thanks for listening. Send this to a friend. Send this to a friend with a great carbon removal idea. Give us a great rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps us a lot to get this to more people. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening. If you could please subscribe and give us a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, that'd be much appreciated. It helps us get our content out to more people. You can sign up for our newsletter at nori.com, follow us on social media, and we will catch you next time.